You're listening to INTERZONE Pod. My name is Gareth Jelley. I'm the editor of INTERZONE, and joining me today is INTERZONE film critic Nick Lowe. Welcome back, Nick. It's a pleasure to have you back on to talk about to talk about a lot. We have a lot we're going to be looking at today.
Fantastic, Gareth. Yeah, no, it's brilliant to be back, and we do have a lot to talk about. So if you're in the shower listening to this, we are not going to be over by the time you're out.
No, yeah, indeed. Yeah, we're going to start right in the present, and pretty much, and last, thinking about time. Last night you went out. You went out to see a kind of like an interesting screening of a film that I've sort of started to hear a little bit about. Could you kind of tell listeners what you saw and what you thought about it?
Right. Oh, you bet. Yeah. Well, it's always great to catch me on the day after a screening. So I have just seen Kalki 2898 AD, which is the Telugu mythological balls out science fictional epic that has taken the South Indian sort of fantasy cosmos by storm, and reaches into the deep past of Purana mythology and into the dystopian future of all stealable Western studio SF tropes that aren't bolted down, and will be in the column for issue 300 when I've got my head back together, because it really is something. So this is basically it's it's Mahabharata 2 in the strangely enough identified in the title the 2898, but it's basically the Tristram Shandy of Tollywood sci-fi epic, in that the title character is still not born at the end of the film. It's launching what it calls the Kalki cinematic universe, which sounds like it's just a kind of optimistic way of talking about a franchise of an indeterminate number of installments that are yet to happen. But although actually one of them seems to have been, or at least partly in the can, so they are moving ahead with it. But they do seem genuinely to be trying to expand it into television series and possibly other media as well. But the first film is about, oh God, I don't even know if I can describe it, but Kalki, of course, is the final avatar of Vishnu, who will end the Kali Yuga, the current sort of dystopian age of the world, and the film is about the it's a kind of lead up to, and I'm not even sure if this is going to happen in the second film, the birth of this 10th avatar of Vishnu in a kind of dystopian future which is heavily modelled on Alita Battle Angel, but with elements of Star Wars and the Mad Max, and Avatar is in there, and it's completely full on all the way through. The score alone has got more sub bass in it than you have ever heard in all films together in your life, and it ends on what would could kindly be called a cliffhanger, or less kindly, nothing really happening apart from a last minute reveal about somebody being an avatar of somebody. But it does take us. It spans. It reaches into the deep past and the not so near future, jumping back and forwards over 6,000 years in time, in a completely entertaining and utterly unsubtle Indian take on specifically, South Indian take on classic SF thrills, and I hope it takes over the world. It's got an interval in it. It's 3 hours. It's 3 hours. And this is a less abnormal thing in Bollywood film than it is in in London. But one of the things about it is that even the press shows have intervals in them, and you're sort of sitting there thinking, okay, what do we now do? Do we sort of go out into the foyer and vape? Do we just kind of sit here and write up our notes?
What did you do? How did you spend?
I spent it reading the next chapter of the novel on which the Ishana Night Shyamalan film, The Watchers, is based. But that's because I'm an INTERZONE geek, and I'm always I never go anywhere without without the smallest possible e-reader, which is a Books Palmer, in my pocket, and so I'm just reading constantly. But I'm a freak.
Oh, you have the Books Palmer. This is the kind of phone form factor one, right?
It's incredible. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, this is the single most important thing you will hear. Get one of these devices. All the books you're trying to finish are with you all the time, in all these kind of downtime moments, like in the queue in Sainsbury's, on the toilet, everywhere. It's a game changer. Except that if you live in my area of North London, when they initially post it to you, it gets lost in the post, and you have 3 months of correspondence trying to get the insurance claim on it. But anyway, I eventually got one, and it's been phenomenal. Yeah, you need it for your Hugo packet if you're a Worldcon attendee. The only way you're going to get through, all of Anne Leckie again. The series nominations are all are always a bit of a struggle. Then you need a proper form factor on your reading device.
Okay, Books Palmer. There you go. And not in no way sponsoring the show. Yeah.
I should say, no. But I am a books nerd. So I mean, one of the 3 screens I have permanently in front of me is there. God, this is a real advertorial, isn't it? The mirror, probably. I'm like Ozymandias out of Watchmen. I've got or Terry Pratchett. Remember Pratchett used to say, one of his routines was when people ask him why have you got 6 monitors, he'd say it's because I couldn't have 10, but I always have 3, and one of them is the Books Mirror Pro, the great e-ink monitor, and I do all my serious reading on that. Yeah. They're great.
And sort of just, yeah. So this is all like connected up to a laptop, or is it kind of a standalone sort of,
Well, this is all running out of 2019 Mac Mini, because Macs have got less good at connecting multiple monitors since then. I think they're now catching up again, but for a while you couldn't connect three. Um, this was not how I was expecting this conversation to go, but yeah, three screens at all time, three portrait monitors, including an e-ink one. That's how you need to live in the 21st century.
They're fantastic.
And a screen in your pocket, and an iPad, and a laptop sitting around somewhere else in the room.
Oh, that's a lot of screens. So you read that in the interval of Kalki. I'm going to get the year wrong, so you should say it.
2898 AD. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And recommended. So if you can it's screening. You said in different versions.
Yes, I mean, so I watched the Telugu version, which I would highly recommend because it's a lovely language to listen to. And one of the things, I mean, if you watch a lot of Bollywood, which I don't, one of the things about original Indian dialogue tracks is that they're constantly dropping in and out of different languages, including English, and there's a lot about the kind of code switching that is there in the actor delivery that I think does enhance the experience. But in London, it's playing, or is going to be playing, in Hindi, in Malayalam, in Telugu, and in something else I've forgotten. But I mean, I don't think your experience will be significantly diminished if you find yourself. You have to kind of look up in the schedules what language any particular screening is, because sometimes different cinemas will be doing different different screenings the same day in different languages. But the Telugu version was great. I can certainly vouch for that.
Super. And you mentioned the Hugo Award voting sort of voter packet, and I was thinking we kind of skipped a couple of shows. It's been a bit of a year. So one of the things we were going to talk about a couple of months ago was award season.
Yeah.
And I think you had a few things you wanted to kind of get in about that, right?
Yes, I mean, 2023 is not quite over yet, because a lot of the films that made that, I think, one of the greatest ever years for SF and fantasy film are still kind of leaking out. There are still a few things that we reviewed in 2023 that haven't yet appeared. I mean, there's a wonderful film that I was raving about, I think probably also on the podcast, called Molly and Max in the Future, which still doesn't have a UK. I'm not even sure it's been out in the US, but when that comes, that will be fantastic. But we've had other extraordinary things that we may come back to. The Beast was only quite recently released. I mean, I think one of the most amazing films I've ever seen. Not even, kind of only just making the top 5 of 2023, because 2023 was 2023. But we've had various delayed releases like Poor Things, Dune Part 2, creeping into 2024 as well. But awards season 2024 had a lot of really exciting stuff to pick from, and some of it was rightly rewarded. The animation category at the Oscars in particular was entirely SF and fantasy films. It was a phenomenal year for animated features. I had to just go back and look at the. I mean, let me just read you off the list of animations. This is just in the animated category. So the Oscar animated features: The Boy and the Heron, which eventually won. Across the Spider-Verse, which should have won. Robot Dreams, which hadn't even been released in the Anglosphere at that time, but it was an extremely beautiful film, and a very thoughtful graphic novel adaptation. We're going to be coming back to talking later about adaptation of graphic novels as a thing that film can do in different ways. Elemental, which crashed on first release, but then became a slow burn hit, and of course Nimona, which had such a wonderful journey to actually happening after getting crushed in the closure of Blue Sky Studios, and then a triumphant return to become this really beloved and groundbreaking film. And the other categories, I think, didn't quite recognize the sheer extraordinariness of what had come out that year. I thought, in particular, the foreign category should have had at least 3 French SF films in there, which didn't appear. But Poor Things did well, as it should have done. I thought it was a great year for screenplays, and the fact that The Holdovers one was the most boring possible choice. But it was obvious to me that Across the Spider-Verse was obviously the best screenplay, but nobody sees it as a screenplay because they see it as this extraordinary animated maximalist experience, and none of these are even my top films of the year. You remember when we were podding about this? It was a hands down victory for Someday or One Day, the Taiwanese body swap time slip, which nobody watched, but is still, I think, one of the all-time great franchise experiences. It was niche. I think you had actively to seek it out, but it lives in my heart forever. A film that completely disappeared in the mix, and I've no idea why, because it was absolutely brilliant, was the French film The Five Devils, which I thought was absolutely sensational. Do you remember this was the olfactory 9-year-old witch time slipping in an intergenerational, interracial sapphic romance, and also ended up absolutely nowhere. But that was 2023. That was the day I watched Poor Things and The Boy and the Heron on the same day. When do you have that kind of experience in your film going life? It was amazing, but also, of course, it was the year that was hit by the strikes, so there was going to be a bit of a cliff drop after, and some things got very kind of drop kicked in the release schedules. Spare at least half a tier for Craven the Hunter, which kind of lost a year. But we've ended up with what was already going to be a very strange year in 2024, that has picked up some of these back-end releases from 2023, and they will presumably be on the awards list for next year, with Dune Part 2, which I was terribly disappointed by, but has gone down extremely well and been a big hit. Clearly one of the front runners, at least in technical categories.
And I think a lot of people saw Godzilla Godzilla minus one for the first time.
Because of its win, yeah.
And because it landed on Netflix, and because Netflix kind of dropped it. And
That's right, yeah. And they dropped it without notice. It was a very interesting release pattern where they just suddenly, we didn't even know it was in there, or at least I didn't know it was it was in their release queue. And that was, the little kaiju that could. It was such a glorious success story and such a beautiful film, and such a great advert for doing really ambitious, effects heavy kind of product with really, really sharp writing and quality effects design on whatever it was, $15 million equivalent. And the thing that it feels like is Everything Everywhere All at Once, which had a similar kind of budget and again was basically the filmmakers training themselves to be their own FX unit. And this just feels like the way that little independent kinds of filmmaking, not that Godzilla minus one is exactly independent, obviously, can go. And I love seeing these little films that are doing a lot with no money at all.
So far this year, what kind of what else? Yeah, what else has really like made a mark for you?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is just stuff that we saw last year but didn't get wide releases till this year. So Poor Things, obviously, is a film for the ages. Whatever one thinks, and my views about this, about how it actually works as an adaptation of the book, it's still on its own terms. I mean, what an amazing thing that we've had 2 Lanthimos films in the space of 6 months. That feels greedy, but they. But obviously, Dune Part 2 was the single most heavily awaited film of 2023, and it would have been a rather crowded year in which to see it, and it definitely kind of hit its moment or hit its audience by having the delayed release that it did, and it set things up well for Dune Messiah, or whatever Dune Messiah turns into. I mean, one's faith in Villeneuve and Spate's ability to do something that actually respects Frank Herbert has taken a severe dent, I think, in Part 2. But there is great filmmaking going on there. It's pushing the boundaries of what you can do in mid-high budget studio blockbuster. So all strength to it, and there's been so much great stuff that on the sort of smaller scale stuff that again sort of came through the festival circuit last year and has been dribbling out. I still think The Beast, Bertrand Bonello's incredible kind of I don't know what you call it, the sort of Henry James story made in 3 different ways as an anthology film with the same cast, is now going to be one of the great films of 2024, and that had quite a good run. That had, I mean, it attracted, at least in London, I don't know about in the wider UK, that got a lot of attention, and I think you can now stream it. But that's been a film you will not forget in a hurry. We've had, I'm thinking of other things from end of last year that have been dribbling out. The End We Start From, that was a very beautiful, properly British Apocalypse adapted very sensitively from um, a really beautiful novel. The Animal Kingdom, another French film, the one where there's a kind of virus that's mutating everyone into animals. That was again one of the classics of the festival circuit that's come out. Robot Dreams, of course, which was released in the French-speaking world, at least, and I think the Spanish-speaking world in 2023, but didn't get its English dub widely seen until this year. So there was a lot of good backlog stuff in the way, and we have seen some. We've seen a lot of. It's been a bit of a mixed bag because 24. You might remember when we were talking, whenever it was at the end of last year, about what 2024 was going to be looking like. We were lamenting that it was franchises as far as the eye could see. Everything except Marvel and DC, or the mainstream MCU and the DCEU, or the DCU without the E as it now is, was going to be having installments, but it was going to be a year where where virtually all the attempts at sort of big studio tentpoles were going to be existing IP of one kind or another. And most of them have disappointed. Most of them have been a bit of a dud. It's been picking up a bit the last couple of weeks, but remember we were talking about how all the superhero films that aren't Deadpool and Wolverine, which remains an unknown quantity, but obviously a lot light on it, have been these Sony Spider-Verse villain films, and Madam Web, which I rather liked actually, crashed and burned in a legendary way that has. I mean, we're recording this on Election Day in the UK. It really feels like 14 years of the extended universe superhero cinema going the way of the Tories. So a very odd year, and we've seen some interesting performers. An interesting sort of restart to the Planet of the Apes franchise. Inside Out 2 has been doing surprisingly well, considering it's kind of a bit all over the place. The Quiet Place prequel has had a mixed reception, but is doing well at the box office, and a lot of people like it. More than the ones following the original family. Furiosa, which, if nothing else, kind of inspires you with a kind of warm feeling that George Miller has still got it in his. I mean, he's 79 now, isn't he? Even if it didn't really, for reasons which are completely understandable, it didn't really set the box office alight, and we've still got ahead of us, as at the time we speak, an Alien film, a Despicable Me film, a Beetlejuice film, which could be quite interesting, a Joker film, a Transformers film, two more bloody Sony films, the Venom one and the
Which of those?
We've got the Venom threequel and Craven the Hunter, which
Oh,
may be
okay.
lovely, but
Hmm.
I mean nobody has have great expectations. We've got Sonic 3, Moana 2. War of the Rohirrim, which feels a bit desperate, but again, could be something. And amidst all that, we've got we've had as is always the case, some smaller films which have done rather more interesting things. So, in the next issue, I'll be talking about Sasquatch Sunset, the cryptozoological indie that with some completely unrecognizable star actors that uses Bigfoot as a kind of eco metaphor for lots of other things that feel very contemporary. The Chilean film Sorcery, which is about kind of colonialism and witchcraft in the 19th century on the island of Chiloe, and does Pablo Larraín in some producer role, and really, really interesting film. Little little Irish films with monsters. So Arcadian, which is uh, uh, a Nick Cage film with a Nick Cage character in it, but is actually interesting for all the other reasons. The Shyamalan family film, The Watchers, or for some reason, as it's called in the UK and maybe even Ireland, The Watched, adaptation of a terrific kind of folk horror novel that slightly unexpectedly really kind of leans into the Irishness of it. So there's been a lot of under the studio radar stuff coming through, and I expect that to continue in the rest of the year. There's one film in particular that I know you and I are particularly looking forward to at the studio end of things, which we will probably come on to right at the end. But I've forgotten our running order. What's coming next?
Um, what's coming next? I think we've covered kind of some of the awards things. We've covered sort of like looking at the first half of this year. I think you've also sort of hinted at some of what's coming for the rest of the year. So I think next up was to talk about what you're most looking forward to for the second half of 2024, other than the Conservatives not being in power, which is incredibly topical and will
Yeah, by the time this podcast drops, of course, this will all seem terribly ancient history. But it's a moderately exciting day where the future actually happens in a way that it hasn't for many dystopian years here. The well, I mean, there is absolutely no contest for the film that I have been most excited about for 2024, probably unduly because the pedigree is a bit mixed. But the trailer for this dropped last week. This is Robert Zemeckis' film of Richard McGuire's graphic novel Here, which is one of the single most justly celebrated experiments in the grammar of graphic fiction in the history of the medium. 25, the book alone, which came out 10 years ago now, 25 years in the making, started out as this 6-page black and white strip in RAW, which almost immediately had. I mean, we arrived in 1989, I think it was, at a time when we were still just starting to think about the narrative grammar, starting to think seriously about the narrative grammar of graphic fiction in a sustained way, and this kind of blew the doors off it. For those who don't know it, this is the maybe we should travel in time back from the film.
So we move from the present to oh, sorry, are we moving forward in time or back in time?
Yeah, moving in all directions in time at once, because that, of course, is what the McGuire version does. So Richard McGuire, just for anyone who has not heard this name, Richard McGuire is by now sort of world famous, although in 1989 I think he was mainly known as the bassist for Liquid, but he was a world famous New Yorker cover artist and all-round graphic genius. Let's start with the book, because the book is the thing that actually exists in the present. The film only exists in the future. But what the book does is to take the corner of his parents' living room as a space which is represented in a series of 300 plus double-page spreads from a single fixed angle, and to show you that space, or what's happening in that space through time, not just in the, as it were, foreground and background action in those spreads, but in inset panel windows, giving you views into other, often very far distant times, where you're just seeing one fragment, one sort of whole cut in the space, and it spans this enormous, millions of years from the sort of early the state of the planet to the distant future, and it's framing the house and the room that McGuire grew up in within this vast kind of Stapledonian narrative of the whole of human history. And the film version has been this is Robert Zemeckis and his core team, particularly from Forrest Gump. So Eric Roth is the screenwriter or co-screenwriter with Zemeckis. Most recently, of course, worked on Dune Part 1. And then didn't work on Dune Part 2, but very... probably the oldest great active screenwriter in the studio system. One of these people who has managed to continue to have a career while everyone else's age has been sacked, and he's done it all. He's got this incredible back catalogue, but the film version is Zemeckis doing, as usual, he's never afraid of the uncanny valley. He and Tom Hanks, and now Robin Wright again, back from the Gump team, are colluding on trying to apply the current generation of performance transformation technology, pioneering a new system which is de-aging the actors in real time, and using things like for example, the kind of technique that we used on the Indiana Jones to de-age Harrison Ford, where the fact that we've got so much young Tom Hanks on film means we've got this huge library of this data set on which to train AI de-ager. And so we get to see these veteran performers at being something other than themselves. If you think about Robin Wright in the Congress, for example, playing characters from this family through the ages, and the trailer, which you have to kind of pause through, I think, is quoting liberally from frames in the book version. It looks like they're losing a lot of the SF stuff. It looks like, to my chagrin, actually, because it's a very important and integral part of the book, that they're not really going into the future of the Earth, where in the book, spoiler, it's all spoilers all the way through because you get this list all the way through. In the book, humanity doesn't seem to make it very far, and climate change very quickly kind of swamps the space in which we live, and we disappear from after the next few centuries. And I'm not seeing any of that in the trailer yet. It is going into the past, and they've decided to go into rather kind of sentimentalized, I mean, rightly sentimentalized celebration of the place attachment, as the social psychologists call it, the kind of emotional attachment you have to places and spaces. But this, the trailer dropped literally while my grown-up elder daughter came round last week and was sitting there in the living room. And in our living room, we have the book permanently on the coffee table. It's it's part of the pile, and it's been there for 10 years, you know. And it just happens that the layout of our living room has the TV in the exact same corner that you're looking at in the book version. It's exactly the same camera angle. So we were playing this trailer, which none of us had seen, through the TV with the whole family watching it as a kind of portal into the future of film. And the reflection in that trailer and that future film of our own lives, because this is the living room in which my children were raised and did all the things that you see in the trailer. And in our view of the TV screen we were watching the trailer on was the book, which my daughter then picked up and read on the sofa while we were rewatching the trailer. So you've got all these kind of little portals into the history of the text itself in all its different iterations, while we ourselves are watching our own history with this story and the space we're watching it in. And I cannot think of a more metaleptic science fictional experience of time than being a family watching a narrative about a family in time in this media-specific but bimedial graphic novel and film experience of multiple times in simultaneity.
Yeah. Okay.
And the film may be terrible. I mean, it may be Back to the Polar Express with all the eyes doing terribly wrong things and uh, heavily sentimentalized kind of familial narratives of a kind that the book is very good at not. Um, Leaving you to do the kind of emotional side of things. But it's got this, it ends on this great line. This was our home. We lived here, as they kind of exit the. And if you look at the way the word "here" is used in the dialogue that's in the trailer, it sounds as though Roth, at any rate, has been very much on his game here.
Mm-hmm. Where does the book end? It isn't quite that, is it? I'm trying to think. I don't have the.
I'll have to go into the living room and retrieve my copy. Just a moment. Yes, despite having read this, multiple times a year for a decade, I couldn't actually remember what the final panel was. It ends in 1899 with the final couple of pages have one of these, what I think of as the kind of flip book moments, where if you turn the page quickly, you kind of get a flipbook animation transition effect, where a bunch of girls outside the big manor house that's in the background before the house in the before the house that has the room in it has been built. They're playing the American version of Ring a Ring a Roses, called Ashes, and the last line is "We all fall down," and then you turn the page and you have the payoff to the mother's line, "Where did I?" Why did I come in here again? And then at the end she says, "Now I remember."
Okay.
And it's a very, very beautiful close, and I'm amazed I managed to forget it. But as you and I were talking about this beforehand, in my academic life, I did an article on place attachment soon after the book came out in its original conference version, appeared, I think, in print in 2017. And when I was, and this book is actually, the great showcase for the affective payload of place attachment as a kind of narrative in space. And one of the things I did for the original conference paper, this is insane now, was that I bought the ebook specially to do this, stripped the DRM, took out all the images and dropped them into a self-playing slideshow, and then when you click on it, you see all the transitions happening, kind of, you just get a sort of second of each page, and you see these animations starting to emerge. And all this was part of what McGuire had been sort of building into this over the 25 years of iterations of this incredibly ahead of its time experiment in the grammar of graphic fiction. And now finally it is, we get 24 panels a second, and we'll see what it looks like in real motion.
Yeah. I hadn't read this until you sent it to me, and the 6 page the 6 page comic is kind of an amazingly kind of condensed and sort of powerful, sort of concept, really well pulled off. I mean, the 6 page comic ends with this this wonderful, this sort of like layering of kind of, I guess, sort of earth sort of forming, billions of years ago, and then in 1945, and the guy sitting down and says, sort of, skip it, which is sort of pleasingly sort of almost like dismissive, and sort of just sort of just it very, very different to the sort of the tone of that trailer, or what seems to be that moment in the trailer, and also to the book. But what I love about it, and I need to go back and look at the book more closely, but it's just it's the way that there's so much that's being said outside of the frames as well, and there's so much sort of there is this sort of climate fiction sort of strain, which it's probably me looking back and layering that on as well. But there's also the kind of colonial stuff coming through, the hammer lying down on the sort of half-built house, and on the wood planks of the half-built house, and then the kind of the sort of indigenous American kind of lying dead in the grass, and then the sort of the house burning down, and there seems to be like a military band in one of the frames, sort of in the future, sort of like a hint of fascism maybe. There's all of this sort of intriguing stuff going on, and it's all happening in 36 incredibly incredible sort of panels. So I'm kind of intrigued to see what Zemeckis does, but also I kind of really want to hold on to this because it's still so fresh for me. I really like these 6 black and white pages.
Yes, no, I mean, the impact. I mean, I remember it coming out at the time, and it just, I mean, there are these moments where something in graphic fiction kind of shakes the world, and this was an extraordinary moment. The 80s was such a kind of revolutionary time, not just in the practice but also in the theory of graphic fiction, and this was such a radical innovation, or such a radical kind of glimpse. Here we go again. I mean, it's impossible not to use this kind of language. A kind of glimpse of the future, of possibilities we'd never thought were there, for the annihilation of time, and the presentation, the emotional presentation of time abysses in a particular medium that could not possibly be transferred to another medium, we thought. And now here we are in 2024 with the guy who at the time was doing Back to the Future films in late career, taking us back to the future of graphic narrative in film. And I fully expect the film to be a kind of a bit of a Poor Things, which was the film I was looking forward to most, apart from Dune Part 2, which was a deep disappointment this time last year. But
I think with Poor Things, it was 71% of the way there, or I feel like...
Oh, I would have said it was about 41% of the way there.
I'm misquoting you.
But then that's because I think I have an almost impossibly high regard for the novel, but this is going to be an absolute triumph in some ways, and it's going to be cover your eyes in others. And I think we have to embrace that, but we always have to remember that as authors are always saying, the film doesn't kill the book. The book is still there. You can still go back and read it. It'll sell more copies. I hope it becomes even more widely known. I mean, as I don't know if you were doing the same thing as I was doing, and reading all the kind of YouTube comments on the was it on YouTube, the comments on the trailer, and 3/4 or probably more than that, 4/5 of people had never heard of the book, and the ones who had were extremely excited and deeply appreciative, and a bit apprehensive, and the ones who were saying, who didn't know this was an adaptation at all, were saying, oh, it's like a ghost story.
That's interesting.
Which in a way it is, but a ghost story is probably inspired by the book.
Yeah. That's that. I didn't read the YouTube comments. I tried I don't say I try not to. I normally don't read the comments, but on this one I am curious to see what people have said. Also, we didn't cover this as a topic, but we were going to talk about screenplays, and I suppose I'm also intrigued to see what the screenplay for it looks like, because as a screenplay of the adaptation in that form, I think is also going to be quite interesting. Yeah, it's November, right? October, November.
November the 15th, yes, worldwide. I think it was going to have a more staggered release, and I think it sounds as though. Is it Warner's are quite confident about it? It's had some very good test screenings from what I hear. So I think it's getting a bigger push than it might have had in the light of Zemeckis' slightly mixed recent output. But Roth has a bit of a tendency towards a sentimentality of a very, very savvily targeted kind. But I think it's going to be technically a very interesting screenplay. And if we're looking ahead to award season, I think that's where its chances come, because I always think the voters in the screenplay categories are the ones who tend most to get it right. I don't think they did this year, but they're the ones who've tended to vote for the SF films, for your Hers and Eternal Sunshines, and they sort of get experimental storytelling as something that deserves to be rewarded.
Mm-hmm. I was going to going back. I was going to ask you, thinking about kind of graphic novels and thinking about kind of comics. I happened to be looking at your part of your review of V for Vendetta, the film.
Oh yeah,
and I kind of wondered, from a while back, and I wondered sort of what would you say are the sort of the most successful film adaptations of comics or graphic novels?
Gosh. I don't think I have an answer to that at the moment. I'd have to go back and think about it. I'd go back and look through the archive. I mean, nothing. There probably is a good answer to that, but I don't think I have one at my fingertips. It's such an interesting. Often, graphic novels get adapted. Because not because of what they're doing. I'm interested in the grammar of the medium. I'm part of that 80s generation which was growing up with, Eisner's books, Eisner's comics and sequential art, and the stuff that was happening in comics fandom at the time, and the kind of beginnings of the emergence of graphic fiction as a theorized academic subject, replicating actually what happened with screenwriting in the early 70s, where suddenly there were courses and there was no theory to kind of populate them. But there are a lot of films which are just they are adapted from graphic novels because the graphic novels had great stories with great visualization. So this year we've had Robot Dreams, which science fictionally is kind of not really doing anything very special, but is a very beautifully visualized and rethought adaptation, but also very respectful visualization and cinematization of a very beautiful graphic novel, leaning hard into the fact that it's eschewing dialogue entirely, and wordlessness is one of the things that you see kind of celebrated there. I'd have to go back and think through them. I don't have an instant nomination. For those who don't want to go back and look at the archive, who probably don't have access to the archive, the thing about V for Vendetta is that they started out. I mean, this was in the age when you could when it was quite easy to find sort of early drafts of screenplays online, and the delay getting the funding meant they moved away from a version which was very, very faithful to the original to one which had been I thought absolutely disastrously kind of reconfigured partly around trying to make Natalie Portman the star because she was the most bankable character in it, and partly around things that the Wachowskis happened to have got interested in while they got bored with their old script. And the original screenplay, I thought, was actually a very good adaptation. But I have a different take on the Wachowskis from everyone else, which is that I think they only got good around the time of Cloud Atlas, and everything they've done since has actually been their best work, and all the Matrix stuff not so much. But that's one of these sort of unpopular opinions, like thinking that the Phantom Menace is the best Star Wars film, that I'm not expecting any agreement on anytime soon.
The Phantom.
Well, I've said that in two different reviews of it, and it's always my kind of go-to thing. I think that nobody else in the world has ever thought, and I'm cool with that.
I remember seeing. I think it was, it was on a forum. It was Lance Parkin, I'm pretty sure. And I think he said, he was talking about how the Phantom Menace was, I forget how he put it, but for the target audience, for the audience of people, not the fans, not the fans who'd seen the 77 and who'd seen the kind of the films before, who were going in with the nostalgia, but for the young audience who were going in, watching it as the Phantom Menace, as with none of the baggage. It was the sort of the optimized, sort of perfect, sort of sort of Star Wars film way. I'm misquoting. I'm sure that isn't what the way you put it, but I have seen people argue that. I think that is a very that's a great way of looking.
Well, you can argue a strong version of it, and I would argue a strong version of it. Actually, there's a Worldcon panel on this. For all I know, I may end up being on it. Okay. So, God, I hope not. But well, no. I mean, I'd be absolutely fine defending this. But the weak version of it is the version you've just summarised. That George Lucas always saw these as kids' films, and it's just everyone else in the world who has disagreed with this. But the Phantom Menace is the one which most purely delivers on that conviction. And I think if you encounter it as a kids' film, it's hugely successful. But where I think the strong version of the Phantom Menace argument is that it actually is even richer if you're able to hold that experience of it in your head, along with the fact that your cute blonde kid hero is going to grow up to be Darth Vader. And what you're watching in this film, celebrating innocence and the values of child-centered, big budget visions of a kind of pulps SF future in which everything is possible, is that you may end up being the Antichrist. You're watching as the second and third installments of the prequel trilogy are very, very bold about and completely in your face about. You're watching the birth of fascism in the underlying narrative desire that juvenile science fiction is feeding. And I don't say that Lucas was fully aware of that, or even fragmentarily aware of that at the time he was making the film. But if you watch that film on its own terms, having seen the original trilogy, everything that follows is kind of a retreat from the full force of that that kind of experience of what a Star Wars film can be. And and actually, I think it is a really well-made film in all kinds of ways that it doesn't get credit for, as well as completely bonkers film, which makes no sense at all, in ways even by Star Wars standards. So I'd still defend it. The other thing about Phantom Menace is that the actual emotional center of it is that it's a film about slavery. One of the very few, big American blockbuster releases which has managed to encode the slave experience in a non-threatening but emotionally going for the jugular kind of way. And again, Lucas is a weird guy, and you don't know how smart he's being intentionally, but that's something that really that really seemed bold at the time, partly because it's so inconspicuous, but the fact that his mother remains enslaved while he goes off to Sith Academy is actually a really, really interesting story. You don't kind of say Sith Academy. Well, it is a Sith Academy eventually, Jedi school.
That's wonderful. The Sith Academy. That's the next spin-off, surely. That has to be the spin-off.
Yeah, that's the next spin-off. I would totally watch that. I would tune into that anytime.
Yeah. That seems like a really great place to wrap it up.
I think we should absolutely wrap up there.
We've covered so much. We've gone from Kalki to the Sith Academy and done a huge amount in between. Just give people a little, just like a preview of what you're reviewing in the INTERZONE issue 300 Mutant Popcorn. What do they have to look forward to?
Yeah, so we've got some of these already touched on. Inside Out 2, Quiet Place Day 1, Furiosa, whatever that last Apes film was called, Sasquatch Sunset I mentioned, Sorcery, the Chilean one, the Watchers or the Watch, depending on where you're watching it. Kalki 2898 AD will definitely be in there. I mentioned Arcadian, all these bloody Imaginary Friends films. I don't know what's going on there, but IF. There's the new Studio Ponok, which I think is not getting a theatrical release in the UK. It's only dropping on Netflix, but the Imaginary looks like it needs to get a mention there. There was also that Jeff Wadlow film from earlier in the year, the horror film Imaginary, which is kind of part of all this. So there'll be a little pocket of those. What else? The kinds of kindness we touched on, kind of a bit borderline, but it is a Lanthimos with fantasy elements in it. And there may be other things I've failed to remember. Oh, Sting, the alien mutant giant spider horror film. Which I think has quite a lot going for it. There've been these odd Netflix things that everyone has kind of seen by now, but which did have theatrical releases, like Ultraman Rising, which will squeeze in. I can't remember whether Under Paris, the French mutant shark hit got a theatrical release, but I might drop that in as well. So there's quite a lot to I would say look forward to, but attenuate to anticipate.
Sounds great. INTERZONE.press for details of how to subscribe and get your hands on Nick's next column. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Nick.
Thank you, Gareth. Always a treat. And we'll be doing this again soon.